So before we start today, you may have noticed a PDF file on the list of files there that's just circles. That's for you. Now, if you don't have a printer, that's cool. We can do this in any way, even if you just need to take a scrap piece of paper, trace a bottle cap a few times. So you can do this while you watch this presentation. Kick back, get creative. So your goal is to make all of these circles into something else. There are no rules. You can link two together. You can link a bunch of them together to make something. The parameters are you only get one ball and one flower. Other than that, this is your playground. And I would like to introduce you to this little gem, Your Brain on Art, How the Arts Transform Us by Susan Megsman and Ivy Ross. While using psychology, resources from public health, social sciences, and neuroscience, Susan Megsman and Ivy Ross are showing the intersectionality between disciplines and highlighting the arts-generated impact.
Founder and director of the International Arts and Mind Lab, known as IM Lab, founder of the Center of Applied Neuroaesthetic, creator of Curiosityville, which is an online learning platform, author of an evidence-based research project called Impact Thinking, assistant professor at Johns Hopkins University School of Medicine, co-director of the Neuro Arts Blueprint Project, award-winning author, and has published 8 books, fellow at the Royal Society of the Arts, and advisor to several projects and organizations. This is the other author, Ivy Ross, and she's no less impressive, so buckle up. She started as a jewelry designer, and her metalwork has been collected by 12 different international museums, including the Smithsonian. She's vice president of hardware at Google Design, created the programming language for home products, launched in 2017. Also in 2017 was featured in 200 People That Will Change the Way You See the World, named one of the 15 most powerful women at Google by Business Insider in 2019, voted number 9 amongst 100 most creative people in business by Fast Company, held executive product design at Gap, Mattel, and Swatch. She has a background in play, sound therapy, psychology, and quantum physics. Served on the Arts and Technology Commission for the Vatican, and was featured in both Wired and Fast Company magazines.
Did you hear what I said? She is responsible for 8 years at Mattel's design, which means this lady is responsible for redesigning Barbie. Ivy Ross was responsible for making Barbie have a more oval, wide waist to make her more like a human. She tried really hard to make it so that Barbie could have flat feet and wear sneakers, but apparently that's part of the brand.
Collar, chip on my shoulder, growing up, art is something elite people do. They have the free time, they have the leisure, they're making a big mountain out of it. They're using it as yet another way to delineate the socioeconomic classes. This is something for them. They're imagining it. A lot of knee-jerk, it screams elite to me. From where I'm from. So I just want to be cognizant of the many people who might be like me starting this conversation. And in anticipation of talking to you guys, I was thinking about how much baggage I bring into art. And then I was thinking, ironically, yes, it's mostly enjoyed and certainly owned by wealthy people, but almost universally created by poor people, which I think is really telling.
I'm really glad you started there. Art has been rarefied. It's been commodified. It's been something that we think you have to be good at it to do it. You have to have money to appreciate it. But in fact, art is our birthright. Just stop there. We're wired for art. It's how we have come into this earth. It's what really has made us human in so many ways. We bring the world in through our senses. In every way we express ourselves through arts is our human nature. And so it's been taken away from us in a way that really has left a lot on the table. And I think that's what we're really talking about in our work, is that the arts are something that we all do all the time anyway. We can do it without that stigma of what art is for commodity and for commercialization.
Your Brain on Art talks a lot about using curiosity and wonder, and that they are not the same thing. Curiosity is the thing that everybody has, and it's the motor that makes you drive forward toward your endeavors. If you're curious about something, you'll continue going and dig at it until you get it right or expire it in yourself and you don't want to do it anymore. Wonder is on the other side. They describe it like love. Like everybody knows what it is, but it's invisible and you know when it's there, but then it quickly disappears. They also say that it isn't just for when you need answers to something. Wonder is a heightened state of consciousness that creates an emotional response. It's a more expansive state, and it has a little attributes of surprise and joy that go with it. So the book talks a lot about saliency. Saliency is the thing that made something memorable. So cognitive function involves our neural networks interacting and then recruiting salient experiences enhance synaptic plasticity. This is from Dr. Rick, let me pronounce it right, Huganier. He also is quoted as saying, "This is why a dynamic presentation grabs your attention. It's because it's a more salient experience. It's not a boring lecture that goes on for 3 hours. It's interactive, there's something to look at, tone goes up and down. It is a more salient experience. You learned it better." There are many elements that go into making a more salient experience for someone.
As we have started to understand more about biomarkers and being able to interpret that into practical use. And so I was asked to join the School of Medicine in the early 2000s to start to think more deeply about how what we knew about learning would actually be able to translate into physical and mental health and well-being and ultimately flourishing. And so a lot of the basic science research that we learned in learning, including neuroscience, but also cognitive science and psychiatry, psychology, started to become the bedrock of what we started to pull from when we were really looking at how to solve problems. And so we do use fMRI, PET scans, EEG, but also other kinds of biomarkers. Think about some of the wrist, like Fitbit. There are a number of different kinds of tools that are used to be able to take different types of biological measures.
So this is your frontal lobe, and it is responsible for planning and movement and long-term memory, reflection, emotional expression, and some eye movement. Your thalamus is here, and it's responsible for sleeping and walking. Right here, somewhere-ish, is the hippocampus. And that little spot there is responsible for your memory and processing. We leave a lot to this little spot. Right here in this little blue area, and it's responsible for all your automatic body features. Just below it, right here, is your pituitary gland, and it's responsible for your growth, aging, and any sexual maturation. Last but not least, right here is your brainstem, and it takes all the signals from all the muscles and nerves in your body and makes sense of it up here. Let's talk about sound. Sound is one of the most effective aesthetic experiences to decrease and relieve stress. This is like, it gets a gold star. Fluid in the inner ear bends hairs on the cell. That converts to nerve impulses. The impulses travel through your brain. Once it gets to your brain, strong emotions and memories are then triggered. And it has the ability to alter your mood and behavior instantly. Dance helps to reduce anxiety. It revises emotional patterns. It's just a plain old good physical activity. It's a form of self-expression. It instills discipline and increases activity in the brain in both hemispheres. Well, Maximum and Ross say that it is the ultimate aesthetic experience. Being in nature strongly affects your parasympathetic nervous system, and that helps you to store physical energy. When interacting with nature, people have an immediate reduction in heart rate, adrenaline, and blood pressure. There is growing research on the effects of forests, wooded areas, and spaces near water for mental health benefits. Firstly, it's really effective for use in describing the physical when language isn't available. Think about in a hospital for a newcomer to a place that can't tell you where pain is or what they're feeling, but might be able to draw it. Also, it's really effective when trying to diagnose small children. They might not be able to articulate what's going on, but they are able to draw you a picture, point to it, even put a marker on their belly or show you that their arm hurts or something like that. Promotes manual dexterity. Now, as an art teacher, this is like an aging dinosaur right now. We're seeing kids in grade 8 that are having a really difficult time using scissors because they're not getting the practice that they once did. Catharsis. Drawing and painting, and sculpting as well, can be excellent tools when it comes to catharting. Releasing emotions that maybe you don't have the words for, but you might have a scribble for it, or even if it's, and I know this isn't the topic, but if it's with clay, clay's like really good for that because you're able to just get out the aggression on a piece of clay. Hand-eye coordination. This is not the same as manual dexterity. Hand-eye coordination, I'm talking about being able to draw from life or draw from a photo. And that means looking at something and being able to replicate it. It also translates into sports. People that draw and paint are often very excellent at observation. They notice not just things about them drawing, on a bigger scale, they notice things about people and places around them. You're training yourself to be observational for drawing, but you're picking up a lot more skills and patience. If we look to our students today and think of, especially if all of us are teaching anyone under grade 12, they've all been born in an age where iPads and phones were always available to them. They do not understand looking something up in a book. They do not understand not having information at their fingertips at all times. But patience does not only relate to things like that. Patience means sometimes you have to wait your turn. Patience means sometimes it takes longer to achieve something and it can't be instant.
These arts and aesthetics, and I always say lowercase a for arts, are something that are not a nice to have. We are literally wired for the arts. And when we don't bring them into our lives, we leave so much of our capacity on the table.
It's interesting. I mean, this is totally off script, but it does make me think about the shame that, like funding for arts can often be cut in difficult economic times. But it's interesting, is there a benefit if you were to integrate this thinking into every topic, I mean, like, could you be a better learner in something like the sciences or math if you changed and integrated some aesthetic component to the curriculum? Do you
I
know
mean,
what I'm asking?
I do, and it's capital Y, capital E, capital S, right? Absolutely. And I think that's the piece that's been missing. You know, the in education, but this is true in every area of our lives. Transfer is the holy grail. Can you take something that you create or learn over here, and can you apply it to these other areas of your lives? And it turns out that the arts, whether you're a maker or a beholder, transfer to other domain areas and other areas of our lives. And
Or not. What matters is that as a human being having a human experience, there are periods of time in my life where my mind calms and I experience a greater level of peace. And if painting gives that to me, then everybody should paint.
So by now you're probably thinking, okay, Jody, sum it all up. What does this mean? Well, I'm going to give you the Coles Notes of it. Sound relieves anxiety and invokes memory and can help with math skills. Wonder opens the brain to amazement and possibility. Dance has a long list, and it can help with self-expression and mobility, joy, emotional regulation, sense of empowerment, and treating neurological symptoms. Nature is for emotional regulation and self-sufficiency. And drawing and painting enhances people's ability for observation, patience, catharsis, and it's a great communication tool. If on any given day, your classrooms were filled with students who were engaged, emotionally regulated, remembering yesterday's lesson or last week's lesson, full of awe and wonder at just the process of learning, able to express themselves freely and accurately, full of joy, empowered, and we're going to go back to emotional regulation and self-sufficiency. Also, if your students were observant and patient and willing to use different communication tools, how different would your day be? But I want to come back here for a second. And of the things that were on the last slide, describing all the benefits of these different arts, did you notice anything that we did not mention? I'll wait. We didn't mention that it just helps you draw. We didn't mention that practicing dance makes you get better at dance. We didn't mention that practicing music makes you get better at an instrument or better at singing. We didn't mention that playing with paints and mixing color makes you better at doing that. Because what we're focusing on here is not how the arts can enhance the arts, but how the arts can enhance everything else. In terms of weaknesses in this book, I was having a hard time finding anything that I could really pick them apart too badly about. If there was a version 2, I would love there to be tried and true brain games, activities that you could do with students, patients that were small. I'm thinking like the equivalent of like a crossword puzzle type of activity, but in these brain game type solutions. Maybe a Spotify playlist that would be calming and relieve anxiety. That would be really cool, actually, to be able to download. And if there's specific binaural beats or tones that could be effective with different ailments, it would be really amazing to have those at your disposal. as far as this book impacting my research and my practice later on, it definitely will. Now, many of the things that I read in the book, I had seen in real life actually play out, but didn't have any science to back it up, just thought that's what I knew as a teacher, or things that might have worked in my classroom, but maybe didn't work in other people's classrooms. Music is one that I have been using since I read this book. I've been using it a lot. When students come into the classroom, they line up outside the art room door. And the reason is because that room services everyone. So every period, almost every day, there's classes in it. So while one class goes out one side, the next class comes in the other. But to avoid a traffic jam and getting artwork messed up and mixed, we stop them. So they wait there. Well, I started at first just playing the relaxation music on YouTube for when they come in. And I noticed that they settled a little easier. Today, I never stopped the music. I turned it down while I was giving instruction and telling them about the piece of art that we were studying. But when it came time for them to engage and do what they needed to do and do measuring and actually create, I turned it back up. And the classroom stayed quieter. I had zero behavior today, with the exception of the first thing in the morning, but I'm not going to count that because this morning there were late school buses because of a small little ice storm that we had, and kids are always a little wiry when they come in first thing from that. So I'm going to attribute it to that first thing in the morning. But I had zero behavior issues today. Nobody had to be called. It just didn't happen. And I had at least 3 students say, this music is calming. I could go to sleep. So maybe I'm overkilling it with that particular music and I need to have something with a little more tempo, but I see it as a success in my classroom. So I have one more thing for you. And I know it's been a long slog, and if this is not your subject matter, you're probably gasping and you've already gone for tea. But I would like to introduce you to a man named George Land. He's a scientist, and he was commissioned by NASA to find the most genius people in the world.
What I want to do in the little time we have tonight is to share with you something, an idea, some knowledge that has been the most important thing in my entire life. And an idea that has me totally frustrated and incredibly optimistic at the same time about the future. So to get started, what I would like to do is to, this is going to be a short presentation, don't get scared. But let's start out with the last 2 million years. And what I've done to make that a little easier to grasp in the time we have is to condense that 2 million years into 1 calendar year, just to give us some perspective about where we're going. So we're going to take that 2 million years and look at it as 1 calendar year. And I'll start at the beginning. About 2 million years ago, give or take a million, the first humans took steps, became bipedal, started to move around in a different way, and began the human journey. January 1, the Stone Age. We spent quite a bit of time hunting and gathering, and it was not until November the 19th that we discovered fire that we could control, heat our homes, cook our food, protect us from predators. But by December the 29th, agriculture had been invented, and all of a sudden cities emerged and people living together and sharing and collaborating. That was a very incredible invention of people, agriculture, on December 29th of that calendar year. On December the 31st was Rome, Greece, the advent of the idea of science, of replicatable knowledge, that somebody could investigate something that nature did, understand it, and then take that knowledge and put it to human use. Big idea, because we at that point could move to 1105. Because now people started to gather together and apply those ideas in a mass way. And they could replicate the results of these ideas. And a very important part of the science idea itself is to find something and then be able to repeat it in a very predictable way. That was critical. And of course, we had to, since we're building a lot of these factories, we had to build factories for human beings too, called schools. So we could manufacture people that could work well in the factories. And that was an extraordinary and important idea because starting at 1105, in the last few minutes, all hell broke loose. And we have moved in such a fantastic way during that period. In those last few minutes, think about just 100 years ago, most people living in America lived in poverty. Very few people had indoor plumbing. Very few people had electricity. In the last 100 years, in the last few minutes of that calendar year, it's incredible what has happened during this period. And that has produced so much progress that we have now turned success into failure. Now that knowledge has spread itself all over the world, and people are pushing up against each other a little bit in the sense that a third world country can do just as well producing something as we can. And that produces a problem. And we're now facing a period in history where no institution is not facing profound, turbulent, unpredictable change. And that's everywhere in the world. So what do we do? Because we have all these old answers, but they don't seem to be working the way they used to. Well, a few years ago, about 60 of the leaders in industry in America got together and started a study to say, okay, with this new kind of world that we have, with the internet, with all the satellite communication, with telephony, there are many more telephones in the world than there are people at this point. What does America do? And I won't try to go through the whole study, but the result was they said there's only one possibility for us to succeed as Americans, to be competitive, and that is to innovate, and to innovate continuously. And that's really what I want to share, because we have been looking at what it is that's behind that process of innovation, creative thinking, what we can do with our brains, what is that, the possibilities of that resource that we all have in these heads of ours. The thing that changed everything for us in trying to understand creativity is that somebody from NASA came to us, the deputy director, and said, look, we have a lot of people working for us. We need some way to select the people that are the most creative so they can go on the teams that are facing the toughest problems. Can you give us some kind of an instrument, a test or something that we can give to find those people? We didn't have such a thing, but we developed it, we applied it, and it was very predictive. It worked really well. But the idea emerged that, gee, we still don't know where creativity comes from. Is it that some people are born with it and others not? Or is it learned? Does it come from our experience in life? And the idea came up, this test is so simple. Why don't we give it to some children and see how they do? So we did. We created a sample of the American population with 1,600 children and started it out when they were about 5 years old. Now, here's a question I want to ask you. This is a test for the ability to look at a problem and come up with new, different, and innovative ideas. What percentage of those 5-year-olds fell into what you might call the genius category of imagination? 80, 90, wow. This is a great audience. There are some audiences that don't guess quite that high. 98%. We were pretty shocked. Some people like you would probably not be shocked. You probably, I suspect you've been 5-year-olds, so there you are. But, the information was so astonishing, we decided to turn that into a longitudinal study, go back 5 years later and see how they're doing it. So we went back, they're now 10. What would you guess? Somebody came on very close. 30%. We decided to extend it for 5 more years. They're now 15. Well, we have some pessimists out there. It was all the way up to 12. So you can see something of a trend here, right? That study ended because so many people got depressed. Most of the testing was done by teachers, and they just didn't want to do it again. But we have tested a lot of adults. And what would you guess? You're close. 2%. Now, the great historian Oswald Spengler once said, in all of his years of studying history, he had concluded it only takes 2% of a population to create the basic ideas and that everybody else applies them. And it turned out, gee, he was pretty close to right. Look, folks, if we're going to enter the future with hope, that's not going to work. We have to do something about it. And what we found with those children was the thing that I want to try to share with you and hope that you walk out of here tonight knowing why that happened and what you can do about it, because you have the possibility of being in that 98% tomorrow. And I'm serious about that. What we found from the studies with children and from looking at the way brains work, that we can actually do that. There are 2 kinds of thinking that occur in the brain, and they use different parts of the brain, and it's a totally different paradigm in the sense of how we form something in our minds. One is called divergent, that's imagination. That's generating new possibilities, and the other is called convergent, and that's where you're making a judgment, you're making a decision, you're testing something, you're criticizing, you're evaluating. So one is like an accelerator, and the other one is like the brake. We found that what happens to these children as we educate them is we teach them to do both kinds of thinking at the same time. So when somebody asks you to come up with new ideas, as you come up with them, what we've mostly learned in school is to start looking at them immediately and trying to say, oh, well, you can hear the stuff that goes on. We've done that before. We've never done that. That's crazy. That'll cost too much. All of that. When you actually look at what's happening inside the brain, you find that neurons are fighting each other and actually diminishing the power of the brain because we're constantly judging, criticizing, etc. This is not going to work, folks. You need to find the 5-year-old, and you can. That capability never goes away. That part of the brain that produces this wonderful imagination is something you exercise every day when you're dreaming. So the great designer said, I'm going to put that mechanism so they exercise it every day in case they ever need an idea. You've got that capability, absolutely. And you'll move from the normal brain, which is that colored area shows normal thinking, to a brain that is very active everywhere, particularly in the front. So it gets worse because if we're operating under fear, we're using even a smaller part of the brain. And as we begin to use logic, we use more, but we begin to use creative thinking and the brain lights up. It's just extraordinary what happens. And nature does this as well, we found. That evolution works that way, producing many alternatives, then through natural selection, selecting the best ones. But it's always creating a lot of possibilities before it starts selecting. So the question we face for the future is, are we going to be in a culture that depends on right answers, that are repeatable, that are always predictable? Or are we going to have a culture where whatever it is we're thinking about, a new recipe or a spaceship, are there many possibilities? Can we create a new future that solves the new problems that we have never seen before? So Einstein was right. And your issue is to go beyond the first step that we took and take the first leap and turn your 5-year-old on to tap into that imagination that every one of you has that can make the future extraordinarily brighter for everybody. Tomorrow, do an exercise. Pick up a table fork, turn your 5-year-old on, and come up with 25 or 30 ideas on how to improve. Let that 5-year-old figure out ideas on how to improve that table fork. You can begin that exercise, and like anything else, you can start exercising that part of the brain and turn yourself into a great innovator of the wonderful future we can have if we start doing this. Thank you.
And this is not good. Oh my god. So this book. Oh my god. Dang. Shit. Dear God.